Well, my name's Horace Sanderson. I've lived in Motto now for 80 years. We came here in 1936. I came here as a 1-year-old, and I was number 7 in a family of 9. And we've lived at Moonford. We lived on the same farm for 71 years. It's been sold now out of the family, and I now live in town. And I've had a wonderful life in a wonderful community. There was no town here when World War I started, so nobody enlisted from Motto, but we have records and photos of some of the blokes like my father who spent their lifetime in Motto. My father was Horace Stephen Hall Sanderson. He was born in 1899 on Boxing Day, and so Dad was only 14 when the war broke out. And he was a bullocky at 16. He had his own bullock team and worked in the timber down around Yandina. And he was, like most young blokes at that age, very keen to join up and help his mates fight for king and country. So he joined up as soon as he could, and he joined up when he was 17, and then wanted to go overseas, of course, and they wouldn't let him go till he was 18.
Well, I think they looked at it as an adventure, and most of them wouldn't have had any money much, and I suppose 6 shillings a day looked attractive. And it was a mateship thing, I think. If their mates were going, they wanted to be part of it.
I've got a letter here that Dad wrote begging the commanding officer to let him go with his mates. I understand that no soldier is allowed to embark from the Commonwealth before he reaches the above-mentioned age. However, I beg that an exception should be made in my case for the following reasons. I enlisted in Queensland with the anticipation of being with my 2 friends, Private Ball and Private Golding. Also, the writer has independently managed the heaviest of all bush work, mainly timber getting, since I was 14 years of age, and have thereby benefited physically. I can confidently add that I am prepared for any hardship that I may have to undergo, and I feel that I am quite equal to the task, as I have been used to roughing it. I would not have enlisted had I thought there would be no chance of me going away with my mates. I've got a photo of him here, of course, in his uniform. It just says, Dad, Horace Sanderson, taken First World War. And he would have been a 17-year-old there. He looks much older, really, when you look at that. His complexion was fair, his eyes were blue, his hair was fair, and he had a scar on his left shin. Just one of many thousands who joined and went to France and was part of the World War I effort. There's a conduct sheet here. There's a record of him making a false answer. He lied about his age, but I bet many did in those days. Well, they were kids. I mean, Vietnam will be forever remembered for the song, God Help Us, We're Only 19. These blokes, some blokes got over there at 15 and 16, so they were only kids, really. And yeah, it was a tragedy from start to finish, but it's part of our history, and a proud part of our history, isn't it? Well, this is a photo of Dad's entire family, his mother and father, all his brothers and sisters. This would have been taken at Yamundi, I guess. Dad didn't get to France until July, and the war ended, as we know, in November. So he was only there for a few months. He was in artillery, and he was quickly moved to Passchendaele, as that's where the war was in those days, in 1918, and that's where he spent the few months that he was in active service. To my knowledge, Passchendaele was the last major battle of the World War I, but it was a fierce battle, and one in which the Allies won decisively, which led to the armistice being signed. And Dad told me a couple of times when we camped together and worked together that he always resented the fact that he didn't get there earlier. He desperately wanted to go over and play his part. I'm forever grateful, because if he'd have got there earlier, I probably wouldn't be here today. So. My father was in timber as long as white ants, and that's Dad with the team. One of his bullock yokes that he used as a bullocky has a memory of my father and what he did during his life. He grew up in the timber. His father was on the Gympie goldfields, and after that went into the timber around Yamundi and Yandina. And Dad was a bullocky in his own right at 16. He had his own team. He stayed in the timber there until he married my mother in 1920 or 21, and then went to share farm at Gameri. And he was share farming at Gameri in 1936 when he decided to move to Monto. Dad's brother came up here first, Arthur. He was a younger brother, and wrote back and told Dad that this was some of the best country around at the right price. And so Dad and Mum left Gameri and moved up here with 7 kids, and 2 more were born after we came to Monto, and so that completed our family of 9.
Well, that's my sister Fay and myself. That was taken at Gameri before we left there to come to Monto. Well, when they came there, it was just virgin scrub, and they had to chop the scrub down. They used to burn it, and we couldn't do a lot of farming up there. It was hilly country. But Dad used to plough, and we had a vegetable garden and that sort of thing.
When we moved, we lived in a humpy, and the humpy was corrugated iron walls, roof, and hessian divisions inside, and a bit of board floor in the kitchen area. We lived in that until in 1939, Dad cut and hauled the timber down to the local sawmill, Sluter's sawmill, had the timber sawn, and then hauled it back on his bullock wagon to the house site, and he employed a cousin to come and build the house. And the house was being built in September 39.
And the Moonford Hall was built the same year. Because he was a timber cutter, he cut a lot of the timber for those buildings. And we started a dairy not long after we came there. And the cream carrier used to come, and the cream carrier bought everything in the cream cans, you know, and the mail and the meat and the bread. The cream carriers used to leave town about 2 o'clock in the morning.
And he dairied there on the farm until 1964. I decided in my wisdom, or otherwise, to buy the farm. I grew up there. Our family, Molly and I, had 4 sons. They all grew up there. Over the 71 years we owned that property, 3 generations grew up there. So we were certainly part of Moonford for a very long time. Dad joined the VDC during the Second World War. That's the little part he played in the Second World War. It never ceases to amaze me how he eked out a living on the farm with 9 of us. He was a resilient guy who was determined to make his mark in the world. I always will admire him for the job he did in rearing the 9 of us in the way he reared us. We had a great upbringing. He didn't talk to me a lot about the war. In fact, not many of the World War I soldiers did. It was, like all wars, a tragedy and a loss of so many thousands of young lives. I think the greatest description of war that I've ever heard, and one I've repeated, is that war has never determined who's right. War has only ever determined who's left. And I think that sums it up pretty well.